TeacherGoals and Teach Your Heart Out is sponsoring a 2023 Bahamas cruise open to all educators. Guests such as spouses, family, and friends are also welcome to attend. There is an amazing lineup of speakers, and you can book your PD at sea now by putting down a $200 deposit. Attend the Sail Away Party Thursday, July 6th in Port Canaveral at 6 p.m. in preparation for Cruising Friday. You will return Monday, July 10th at 8 a.m. Scan the QR code now to sign up. You don't want to miss it.
Hey, super excited about tonight's episode. We are going to be talking all things special ed with Catherine Whitcher, and she's going to be sharing with us not only how to write real world IEP goals, but how to implement them, how to ensure that our students with disabilities are able to achieve success in the classroom. So super excited about that. My name is Erica Terry from Healthy Wealthy Educators. Always love to know who we have in the house with us. So if you haven't already done so, put it in the comments. Tell us about who you are and what you do. And if you are going to be joining us for the Teach Your Heart Out cruise, let us know in the comments. We showed a commercial for it right at the beginning. So if you missed out on that, I'll make sure to show it again at the end. But super excited about the cruise coming next year. And so I just saw somebody put that there is no sound. If you cannot hear me, or give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. If not, all right. So Eugene says he can hear. Maybe someone muted. But if there's any issues with the volume, just let me know and I will try to troubleshoot it on my end. But with that being said, if this is your first time hanging out with us, let me just kind of share with you how we roll here at the Teacher Goals podcast. I will be bringing up our guests and asking her a lot of questions, special education related questions, as she is answering, as we are having our discussion. Feel free to put whatever questions you have in the chat, because she will be answering your questions at the end. And so you can either hold your questions to the end, or you can put them at the chat in the chat as we're talking, and I will be sure to bring them on up. And so, questions, chat. We will have a live Q&A at the very end. Once again, I want to welcome you all. If you have not already done so, make sure you tell me who you are and what you do. We have a children's author with us tonight, Glennie's from NYC. Thank you to everyone that said you can hear me. I appreciate that. I want to say hello to Shannon. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have Blossom. Welcome. Super excited that you are here. And so excited to have so many educators with us tonight. We have Rebecca, who is a pre-K teacher. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And so with that being said, I don't know about you, but I love talking about special education, because so often I feel like our special ed teachers are left out of the conversation. So often when we have professional developments, it's almost like it's an afterthought when it should be a forethought. We should be thinking about our students with disabilities. Right from the very beginning, looking at their data, examining their data. And so we are going to bring up our guest tonight, Catherine Whitcher, and we are going to be diving into how to write and implement real world IEP goals. Hello, Catherine. How are you?
I am good. I'm excited to be here tonight with everyone.
And we are super excited to have you. And so, if you don't mind, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. I love to start off by asking you to share with us who you are. Tell us about what you do, your role in education, and how you got to where you are today.
Absolutely. So I'm the founder of the Master IEP Coach Mentorship and Network. That's what I do now is I help parents, teachers, admins, and therapists build IEPs that work in the real world. But if you would have told me that I was doing this 20 years ago, I would have said, no way, no way. So I'm a special needs sibling. My brother is 45 with Down syndrome. So I grew up watching my family, really advocate inside of the special education system. And as a sibling, I'm like, I don't get it. Like, why can't the teachers just do what my brother needs? Like, I don't understand. So I'll just go become a teacher and then I'll just save the world from the inside of my classroom. That's the plan. That's the plan.
Yeah.
So I go all in and I go get my bachelor's, I get my master's, I get, all these different teaching certificates. And I got into the system and I was like, oh, this is why it's hard. There's a lot of stuff that you don't see as a family member. There's a lot of things they don't teach you in college. There's just a lot of things that happen in education, and then layer all the special ed IEP and all those things on top of that. It was a lot. And I loved working, in my classroom, but I was that teacher that was that like wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of teacher, like telling the parents like, hey, I can't ask for this, but if you say this, then I can work with my boss and make that happen. So I started coaching parents and I ended up leaving the classroom and doing that full time. And what happened is I was teaching parents, sometimes I'd go to IEP meetings with them, and the schools started to notice that I was bringing all these collaborative strategies to the IEP table on behalf of the parents. And that's because I knew what it was like to be a teacher. So I was never going to throw the staff under the bus. I wasn't going to be that person that came in with the parents and I was like, hey, you need to do this. No, it's like, how can we make this happen? So one time I had this administrator chase me onto the parking lot and I felt like I was in trouble. You feel like you get called in the principal's office.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, and she goes, who do you work for? And I said, myself. And she says, can you train my teachers to do what you just did at the IEP table? Can you train them to write IEPs like this? And I was like, yes, I'm all in. So that was many years ago. And I've been traveling and speaking and just creating IEPs at all different levels with all different key stakeholders at the IEP table. And that's where the Master IEP Coach Mentorship came along. So it's the only training program that invites parents, teachers, admins, and therapists to learn and train about special education all in the same room, all at the same time. Because if we're going to work together, we need to learn together. So it's a really unique experience for everyone who goes through that Master IEP Coach Mentorship, because they get perspectives from all sides of the IEP table.
Yes, I love it. And I especially loved how you described the shock that you felt when you entered the classroom as a special education teacher. I can tell you that I co-taught for years as a general ed teacher. And then when I went into administration, all of a sudden, special education fell under my realm. And I was shocked by all of the expectations that special education teachers have. So let's kind of start there. For someone who may be on tonight that is general ed, maybe they co-teach, so they get to sit in on the IEP meetings, but they're not really clear on the role of the special education teacher. I know you can't lay it all out, but kind of just paint a picture of the life of a special ed teacher for us.
Yeah. So the life of a special education teacher, overwhelming most of the time. Like,
yes.
Let's just call it out. We all know that teaching itself is probably not what we expected. It wasn't this, we had this thought of, oh, this is what teaching will be like. And that's not usually how it is. And that's okay, because once we get over the shock factor and we move forward, it's all right. But the first thing that I tell teachers, so when I'm in a room full of teachers, I said, listen, we got to start with the foundation of what an IEP is for. And I say, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to give you, legal advice and teach you the law, but I am going to tell you where to look. And this is for all teachers. It's for every teacher that is with students, that the purpose and findings of idea law are really important, and they're often forgotten. In fact, I've sat in rooms full of administrators, and when I say this, they go, oh, because everybody thinks administrators know about special education, and they don't always know either of what's going on. So purpose and findings of idea law. We've all heard the phrase, it's to provide a child with a free and appropriate public education. We use this word FAPE, F-A-P-E, so your free and appropriate public education. But there's two, kind of next steps to that phrase. So it's to provide a child with a free and appropriate public education to meet their unique needs and to prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. And that's where you can start to shift your perspective as a teacher, no matter what your role is in the education of, okay, my job when a child has an IEP is to make sure that I'm meeting their unique needs and I'm preparing them for further education, employment, and independent living, whatever that looks like for that child. So it's important for us then to say, okay, now it's not that you're taking any weight off. We know that, special education feels heavy, but we're redistributing that into what is most important. And that's truly preparing a child for the future.
I love it. And that's what we are going to be focusing in on tonight, preparing a child for the future. But before we dive into like the tips, tools, and strategies to develop these real world IEP goals, when we talk about developing or helping a child, preparing them for the future, we know with students with disabilities, well, with any student, that's going to look different. But can you kind of paint a picture? Once again, I'm talking to those people that may not be as familiar with special education, and kind of just share like the transition plan, or what are even the expectations for this future? How can we help our students with disabilities be successful, or what does that success even look like?
Yeah, so I will give you my number one kind of thought right here when it comes to how do we figure out if we're doing this right? Like,
yes.
How do we figure out what's this next step? Like, maybe you don't know about special education in the way that you think maybe you should. And you're like, and I don't know, I got all these responsibilities and now I'm supposed to know all this other stuff too. And I completely understand that. So when I'm working, especially with general education teachers, now I share the same strategy with special ed teachers because it makes them go, aha, and now they can write IEP goals differently. But for gen ed teachers, it helps you see through a different lens.
Yes.
And I want to help you do that by encouraging you to ask yourself one question. When you are working with a student and you are teaching them a skill, especially when you're hitting that wall of like, I don't know how we're going to do this. I don't know, we've been trying. I want you to ask yourself, do you use this skill in real life? Not worrying about what's the potential of the child. Will they ever use it? I don't know if they'll ever get there. I don't know, whatever. Now, I want you to filter what you're doing for a child who has an IEP through that lens of, do I use this? Do I use it? Because if I use this, it's probably a pretty important skill. Like it's something that okay, we need to keep working on this. If it's something that you're like, you know what, we're working on this, and you know what, I couldn't tell you the last time that I was walking down the street and I had to name off all the states and capitals. Like, didn't really have to do that, in my everyday life. I don't really know if this is something that should fall under like direct instruction with, the teacher, taking data on it and like pushing forward on this. We have to really think of the why behind what we're doing. And I think sometimes, especially general education teachers, they're afraid to do that because they're like, well, special ed teachers are the expert and they wrote the goals and they told me I have to work on this stuff. And they said, and you know what, we can't get into all of it. But again, I give the same kind of, strategy to special ed teachers because it helps us prioritize, because we're never going to fit everything that a child needs to learn into an IEP. So if we can't fit everything, we better pick the best.
And let's talk about it. So we can't fit everything. Let's pick the best, all right? So I do a lot of work with co-teaching, and I could see right now this, I won't even call it an argument. I'll call it a heated discussion brewing on what should be included in these goals. Like, should our IEP goals be about the standards? Because as the general ed teacher, I'm looking at the standards, and all students should be able to achieve these standards. Or is there a different way that we should be looking at it and thinking about it when we're writing real world IEP goals?
So you always have to remember that first place where we started, because that's federal law. That's it. Federal law says our job with an IEP, our obligation is to prepare a child for the future. Now we could say, well, the standards were written by, somebody. We don't know who in the state, but somebody put together these standards and said, this is what a child needs for the future. But we have this layer of an IEP that says, but we get to customize it. And we don't have to include every standard into the IEP. Again, we're prioritizing this further education, employment, independent living. So I always say start there, especially in a co-teaching, if there's that kind of tension that's happening, and the special ed teacher's like, well, we have to do this. And it's like, well, but we have to do this. Let's always start with the child first and say, okay, let's further education, employment, independent living. Let's make sure that this is a goal that we know is going to have a long-term impact. And then we can match it up with the standard and make sure everybody has, the accountability and has the compliance that they need. So compliance and accountability are huge, especially in that co-teaching or in general education. We're looking at, can we be compliant with this IEP? Do we know who's accountable for what and what's happening? And again, one of the things for general education teachers to understand is just because a standard isn't in the IEP doesn't mean that you can't work on it. Mm. It's something that the IEP is a minimum. The minimum. So it's like, well, this doesn't include, so I don't know how they're going to be in my class, because how are they going to, I know, I hear it. I had thousands of conversations this summer working with teachers, and I heard a lot of it, and they're pulling me out into the hallway. Like, can I just ask you this question? And it very much was like, I don't get, how am I supposed to do that? And I said, you need to focus on that IEP first. The special education teacher's job is to take what the child needs, match it up to the standard, and then you guys can co-create something that's going to help the child reach that goal that matches that standard.
I love it. So let's talk real world IEP goals. How are we developing these goals? What should a special education teacher do to move beyond that standard, general, everybody, puts these cut and paste goals and maybe tweak it a little bit. I used to work in the Department of Education, and one of my roles was to audit these IEPs. And so I would see these cookie cutter goals that were kind of changed maybe a little bit from year to year, but really not customized for the student. So how do we move away from that and really develop these real world IEP goals that students can actually achieve?
Okay, so there's a section of the IEP that's not in the IEP goal section that can change the entire direction of the child's IEP. And that's the parent input section. And a lot of times this is something that's done on the fly at the meeting. Hey, mom, you got any concerns? And the mom's like, after everything's been thrown at her, or she hasn't slept for 3 days waiting for the meeting. And they're like, I don't know, not really at this time. And anytime that I open up an IEP and it says like, mom has no concerns at this time. And I'm like, have you ever met a parent that has no concerns?
Right.
Like, that is not true. That is not true. Mom wasn't able to formulate her thoughts in a way that she wanted to share. And the reason I bring this up is because parents are supposed to be an equal member of the IEP team. So if we're writing goals, we're writing goals to support the child and to make sure that we're including the family and what they see as important moving forward. Because let's just face it, you've got that student for probably 1 to 3 years, depending on what your role is. This parent is going to be the parent forever. So let's make sure that we're including things. And my process, and I'm gonna go through it so quickly, This is something that's huge in our Master IEP Coach mentorship as we go through this whole process of, the team sends home this notice that says, there's an IEP meeting coming up, and I encourage parents then to send back and say, yes, I'll be there. Please see attached parental concerns. And they just start listing out some of their concerns. Now I teach them how to do it. So it's not a dumping grounds of complaints. We're not throwing anybody under the bus. We're not just, yelling about everything. But it puts it on the radar of the team. And you know what, Erica, can I just address one of the comments that's in there? Because I know that some people are listening to this, and this is like, this is the teacher in me, right? Like I can multitask. I'm like, ooh, I want to hit that real quick so nobody shuts down. Somebody said not every state has a parent input section. It absolutely does. It's legally required. It's called something different depending on what type of IEP software that you're using. But a lot of times it's called parent educational concerns. So that when I say parent input statement, I'm talking about whatever section, whatever it's called in your paperwork that says parent something. So it's parent vision statement, parent educational concerns. There is a 1,000,000% there is a spot for that in every IEP. So if we start to teach the parents how to share their concerns with academics, functional, life skills, social, emotional, behavior, communication. If we cover those things, then we start to be able to shift the IEP into real world IEP goals that are going to have a long-term impact. And I'll give you an example of something that we just had a parent include into her parent input statement to share with the team. She said, my hope for my child is that he learns independent leisure skills beyond screen time. So if we think about that as a teacher, you're like, I can do that. Right. That's important. And when we think about, is that necessary for further education, employment, independent living? Yes, it is. That's something that we need to be able to be independent as possible without screens all the time. Let's go ahead and learn how to play maybe solitaire with an actual deck of cards so then we can learn how to play Uno with somebody else. Right. And having these leisure activities, when we talk about transition planning into the real world at secondary, hanging out with your friends in your family and being able to socialize and to do some common activities, that's very important. That also includes a lot of math skills, a lot of reading skills. So when you think it's like, oh, but that's just playing games. No, it's not. It's colors, it's numbers, it's communication, it's social, it's emotional, it's all of those things. So when you can get things from a parent about what's important, and then we kind of put on our teacher perspective and say, here's all the skills that go into that. Oh, and then we start to write goals, and then we can match those up to the standards. Okay, this is where we're at. This is where we're going. And then we have a true why of what we're doing. Because you know what? Maybe that family loves camping. And maybe when they're camping in the summer, it's really hard for them because their child is, completely obsessed with the iPad and they have to have the screen, and they really wish they could just have downtime, sitting around the fire, hanging out, playing cards or something as a family. That's a quality of life thing. And that's something that we can do as educators to help support.
That is some great advice, great examples. And so when going through this process to develop these real world IEP goals, really basing them on the input from the parents and really individualizing them to students, what challenges do teachers tend to face? And most importantly, what can they do to overcome those challenges?
Yeah. So, again, we're just going to lose the filter a little bit here and call it out what happens sometimes at the IEP table. And a lot of times as a teacher, either you're saying it even if you don't want to, or you're hearing somebody else say at the table, we don't do that here, or we can't do that here. And it's like, how do we flip this conversation and start saying, how can we do that here? And I know that we haven't done that in the past, but maybe this is something we can try. So I understand that delicate balance. I was there of trying to speak up, but keep my job, make sure that I could get through my school day without, worrying about some, pink slip in my mailbox kind of thing, of speaking up too much. But if you learn the right questions to ask and you start thinking about How can we make this happen? Then you start to get the team into a mindset of problem solving versus shutting down. And if you're going to be a leader at the IEP table, and heads up to my gen ed teachers, you guys can be leaders too. I know a lot of times you're like almost the most quiet person at the table. Yeah, I'm on a mission to change that with you guys because you guys have valuable input. You guys are the expert in curriculum in a completely different way than a special education teacher. So being able to have this, how do we make this happen? And how do I make sure that I'm helping to prioritize this child's education and make sure that we're educating them as a whole child and that we're looking at this long-term outcome. But learning the right questions to ask and asking how is really important. The other thing is for you to go ahead and call out some of those, I'm going to call them old-fashioned IEP goals. Some of those goals, and you don't have to say like, we shouldn't work on that. It's have that conversation before the actual IEP meeting. And no, that's not predetermination. And no, I'm not saying have an IEP meeting without the parents. And no, I'm saying work together as colleagues with the parent input and start thinking about what is possibly a better way to get things done than we've been doing them before. How do we get creative in this? And a lot of times IEPs feel like drudgery, like, okay, cut, paste, go, cut, paste, go. 80% accuracy, right? Oh my gosh, 80% accuracy on almost everything. And I'm like, you know what? Some goals need to be at 100% accuracy and some goals could be at 30% accuracy because the baseline says you're only currently at 10%. I mean, we don't know. Those percent should be everywhere. So it's really important for you as you're starting to design IEP goals for the real world to challenge what has been done before by asking proactive questions that really spur discussion.
Yes. And so can you give us an example? I'm looking at a question in the chat, but can you give us an example of like a proactive approach that someone could take if they are struggling with this exact scenario that you described and is having a hard time at their school speaking up?
Yeah, I'll give you one of the, I talk about this example all the time because everybody has had, if not this conversation, they've had a very similar conversation. And it's this is how it starts. I say, I'm looking at math goals. I'm seeing some money goals on there. And this is not something that we're like throwing out at the IEP table in a way where we're going to cause conflict. So just so you know, this is not a surprise conversation. This is a conversation that we're having as a team prior to sitting down. And I'll see these math goals and I'll say, ooh, I don't use pennies to pay at Target. Like, do you use pennies to pay at Target? I don't use pennies to pay at Target. And it's like, oh, you're right. We don't use pennies to pay at Target. Wait, do we use pennies at all? No, but the curriculum says we have to do pennies. We're like, with pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, then dollars, then whatever. And I say, yeah, but we got this ideal law that says that we get to customize things. We get to look at how is a child going to be prepared for this further education, employment, independent living. And pennies aren't going to get us there. Like especially when we've seen the same penny goal for 3 years in a row. Well, we need to do pennies for one-to-one correspondence. And I'm like, I could learn one-to-one correspondence with my favorite pieces of candy. And I bet you I would learn it faster because that's going to have more meaning to me. Now, when I go to Target, I don't know about you, but when I go to Target, I'm like, I got 2 things on my list. I don't know what they are. Maybe they're paper towels and some paper plates. And I'm going to go into Target and I'm going to stop at that dollar spot. I'm going to see what's going on. And I'm going to throw a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And you're doing math in your head the whole time. I need 4 of these and oops, this is coming up. And how about that? And how long will these berries actually stay fresh? And I'm not really sure. And then you get to the checkout. Now, if somebody's paying at the cashier with a bunch of pennies, you're not even going to go buy them because nobody pays with pennies. You're going to go to self-checkout. So you're going to go to self-checkout and you say, which card do I use? Target red card so I can save 5%. You put that in there, put in your little code. You're going to bag up your stuff. You're going to go. So many skills. So when I'm talking about real world skills, I'm not saying that we need to take, 3rd graders who have IEPs to the grocery store or to Target to learn how to do this. What I'm saying is there are financial literacy goals. There are things that we can be teaching in math that are going to go to what you just did at Target. You were doing a little bit of budgeting. You were definitely doing some rounding and some estimating. You were figuring out wants versus needs. You're figuring out a lot of things that require a significant amount of reading, writing, math, all of those kind of skills. And that's the conversation that we start to have. We start bringing, when we see something, we start to bring it to life. Instead of it just being a paper, we say, how do we use this? Do we need to keep using this? Or do we need to do something different?
Yes. And so for someone that is watching tonight, they are completely inspired to move away from old-fashioned IEP goals and move towards writing and implementing these real world IEP goals. What's one action that they can implement when they walk into their classroom tomorrow?
I want you to question the real why behind the struggle that you might be having that day with that student. And I know that there's a lot of, we're not getting into the behavioral side of things. We're not getting the social emotional. We're not talking connection and relationships right now. I'm talking about straight on like that direct instruction or that small group instruction. And there's a struggle. And you're like, this is hard. Like IEPs and differentiating instruction and figuring out all this stuff. Like this is hard. It is okay to step back and say, why? Like, and how? So it's like, why? Like, and how do we do it different? And it's okay to stop doing what is not working as long as you're communicating with your team. And it's okay to try new things when you communicate that with your team. And most parents, if you go to them, even after the longest IEP meeting you ever had, and 90 days later, you're like, this is still not working. If you say, listen, I have the data, it's not working. For the next 30 days, we would like to do this, to try something different. The parent's going to be like, thank you for telling me. Thank you for having transparency and letting me know.
Yes. And thank you for, collecting the data and then actually using it to try a different approach. That is powerful, powerful. And so for people that want to learn more, that are excited and want to keep learning from you, tell us, where can they find you?
Well, you can hop on over to katherinewhitcher.com or masteriepcoach.com. So it's really, there's resources everywhere. We've got supports for, again, parents, teachers, admins, therapists. We have upcoming conferences that are happening all around the country. We've got online training and programs that are happening. So anything from a special education mastermind, you want to come and learn from the best of the best and nationwide IEP experts and sit in a small room, 12 to 15 people, just talking all things IEPs and solving your struggles. So again, just hop over masteriepcoach.com or katherinewhitcher.com. You'll find all the things.
And I will say that in this 30 minutes, I now understand why you are called the Master IEP Coach. I learned so much tonight. I'm like, oh, we got to bring her back and talk about this and talk about this and talk about this. I truly enjoyed this conversation and want to thank you for stopping by and hanging out with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right. So now we are going to jump into our Q&A. For those of you that have been watching, now is the time for you to go ahead and put your questions in the chat for Catherine to answer. I know that we were actually tackling some of those questions as we were discussing, because they were right on time. So I'm going to give people a few more minutes to put some questions in the chat.
And Erica, you want me to shoot out a couple of most asked questions?
Yes, that would be awesome.
I can do some top asked questions by teachers. So I will tell you, this summer, one of the biggest concerns that teachers had, they were coming up to me saying, what am I supposed to do? I have so many students with IEPs. I've never had this many kids with IEPs in my classroom before. And these are general education teachers who, these are kiddos that typically are going to resource room. They're mostly in the general education, and those IEPs are just stacking up. And they're like, I know I'm not going to be able to serve the students the way that people are expecting me to serve the student. And I said, okay, well, we need to actually make this into a fact, because feeling like you can't serve versus actually not having the time to serve, based on the numbers that are in the IEP, two different things, because we can feel overwhelmed or we could actually physically, like the time doesn't work out. So you do have to take that time if you're in that situation to go into the IEPs. It's tedious work, but it helps relieve you when you look at like, okay, I've got this many kids with this many minutes. It is physically impossible. It's not just in my imagination. It's physically impossible for me to do this. And then talking to whoever your higher up is about that, like, listen, we're going to end up out of compliance because I literally physically cannot serve in this way. We need to find a way. Now, everybody says, well, I can't do that because then, you know, like they don't want to hear that we're going to be out of compliance. But whenever you go with a problem, you should bring a solution, right? Mm-hmm. So your solution is there's always more than one way to provide FAPE, that free and appropriate public education. So what I'm saying is the way that the IEPs are written right now, maybe you physically cannot be compliant with them, but I'm not talking about reducing services. I'm talking about doing things differently. So is there something that you can do as a team to work together to make sure that you're writing IEPs that are still appropriate? They're still going to help the child achieve. They're still going to have all of the progress that we're expecting, but we might have to deliver things a little bit differently based on the current situation of caseloads or staff shortages or those things. And you have to not be afraid to have that conversation, because when you are afraid to have that conversation, that's when we just know that the guilt and all of those things, the workload, everything just piles up and it feels more, miserable than you could even imagine.
Yeah.
So you have to have that conversation.
Love that. Definitely. And just to add to that, never assume that the administrator or that higher up understands compliance and, everything that you all do as special education teachers. So it's so important to speak up, especially, when you are experiencing that overwhelm and stress, you're not sleeping, like definitely speak up. Any other commonly asked questions?
Yeah, I've got one for you. Actually, I'm going to tell you guys about a hidden part of the IEP. It's like hidden. Uh-oh. It's secret. I say that it's secret because, again, when I was teaching this summer, in a room full of admins, and, admins, they always have their laptops with them. I don't know, right? You guys always have like laptops and iPads with you. So I said this, there's this part of the IEP, and the admin, I could just see, she was like, there is not. And she opens up her laptop and she looks at, there's this part of the IEP. I didn't even know that this existed. And it's supports for school personnel. And supports for school personnel is in every IEP. Again, it can be labeled different. It could be a different checkbox. It could be different whatever. In fact, some of the administrators I was working with, they're like, see, look, it's not in my IEP. I said, pull up a draft, like as if we're starting it. I said, you didn't click the button on the other one, so it never printed out in the final copy of it. I said, you had to start a whole new one to find it. So there's all different ways to find it. But supports for personnel is a really important section for all teachers to know about. And that's a place where you can ask for the training and the tools that you need to implement that IEP. So many times, especially as gen ed teachers, you're expected to do things that you have no training in. They're like, oh, just implement this visual schedule. You're like, does it use it like the other kid from last year? Do we use it a different way? I don't even know how to do this piece. So being able to get that training or consult minutes or tools that you need and things into that supports for personnel, it's important for you and your IEP team to know how to effectively use that. And you can also use that to get the parents some training if you need them to do things like you're doing at school.
That is amazing. Great advice. And I just want to thank you. I have learned so much tonight. I know that our listeners, our viewers have learned a lot as well. I appreciate you being with us. We have someone who says, Arlene, who says teachers always need training. That's so true. Love that section of the IEP. We have a LinkedIn user whose name didn't show up, but said this is very practical. And I know that I've seen other comments come through where people have just shown their appreciation, even with the thumbs up, the yes that we got from Roxana. And so I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was right on time. Such great advice. And once again, where can people find you if they have questions later?
You can hop right over to CatherineWhitcher.com or MasterIEPCoach.com, and you'll find special education resources that quite honestly you've probably never seen before, but they're all practical, they're all team focused, and they'll all help you have a better school year.
Thank you. Definitely will check out those resources on that website. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. We appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us. And we will be back next Thursday. I am going to share with you all our Teach Your Heart Out cruise. We are partnering with Teach Your Heart Out to host a conference this summer or next summer. I'm so excited. I'm like, it's this summer. And we want you to join us. So I will be sharing that information with you. I hope you can join us there, and definitely join us here next week, next Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I will see you there. Have a great night, everyone.
TeacherGoals and Teach Your Heart Out is sponsoring a 2023 Bahamas cruise open to all educators. Guests such as spouses, family, and friends are also welcome to attend. There is an amazing lineup of speakers, and you can book your PD at sea now by putting down a $200 deposit. Attend the Sail Away Party Thursday, July 6th in Port Canaveral at 6 p.m. in preparation for Cruising Friday. You will return Monday, July 10th at 8 a.m. Scan the QR code now to sign up. You don't want to miss it.